Africa's history is like a book with missing pages, and one of the most dramatic, often painful chapters is its colonial past. For centuries, foreign powers divided the continent, changing its people, lands, and cultures for their own benefit. But colonization wasn't just about drawing borders on a map. It was about lives disrupted, wealth stolen, and the strength of African people who refused to be silenced. Let's uncover this complex history, starting with Africa before the Europeans arrived.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
Long before Europeans arrived, Africa was full of powerful and rich societies. In West Africa, the Mali Empire had so much gold it amazed traders. In the south, great Zimbabwe had huge stone buildings. Other great kingdoms like Songhai, Ashanti, and Benin had strong governments, busy markets, and rich cultures. The city of Timbuktu in Mali was famous for learning, with libraries that drew scholars from Europe and Asia. Africans lived in many ways, some in big cities, others in small villages or as nomads. They spoke thousands of languages like Swahili, Yoruba, and Amharic. They followed many religions, including Islam and traditional beliefs. Trade was very important. Caravans crossed the Sahara with gold, salt, and ivory, and ships sailed the Indian Ocean, linking East Africa with places like India and China. Africans were smart, skilled, and connected to the world. But Africa's wealth attracted greedy outsiders. By the 1400s, European explorers like the Portuguese came looking for ways to reach Asia. When they saw Africa's riches, they wanted them too. At first, they traded with African leaders, offering guns and cloth in exchange for goods. But over time, this trade turned into stealing, beginning a dark and violent chapter. By the 1800s, Europe was hungry for Africa's resources. The Industrial Revolution was transforming European cities, and factories needed raw materials like rubber, copper, palm oil, and cotton, all abundant in Africa. Gold and diamonds sparkled in African soil, promising wealth. Controlling these resources meant powering Europe's economy and outshining rival nations. But it wasn't only about money. Controlling parts of Africa made countries like Britain, France, and Germany feel strong and important, like they were winning a global game. Politicians boasted about their empires, and citizens cheered, believing it proved their nation's superiority. Some Europeans even claimed they were helping Africans by spreading Christianity and Western ways, a racist excuse to cover up the real goal. The slave trade had already hurt Africa badly. For centuries, millions were taken, and many kingdoms were left weak and broken. By the 1800s, the trade was ending, but the damage was done. Europe saw a chance to take over. New tools like steamships and machine guns made it easier for them to invade, and medicines like quinine helped them survive diseases like malaria. Europe was ready to take what it wanted. The scramble for Africa kicked off in earnest after the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. European leaders met in Germany, sat around a table, and divided Africa like a pie. Number of Africans were invited. They drew borders with rulers and pens, ignoring tribal lands, languages, and cultures. For example, the Congo was handed to Belgium's king, Leopold II as his personal property. Nigeria became British. France took much of West Africa. By 1914, only Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent. These new borders caused chaos. Tribes who had lived side by side were split apart or forced together under foreign rule. Imagine waking up to find your village now belongs to a country you've never heard of, ruled by people who don't speak your language. This was the reality for millions. The Europeans built railways and ports, but not for Africans. They were for shipping resources back to Europe. Cities like Nairobi grew, but they served colonial needs, not local ones. Life under colonial rule was tough. Europeans set up systems to extract as much wealth as possible. In many places, they forced Africans to grow cash crops like cotton or cocoa instead of food for their families. This led to hunger in places like Kenya and Uganda, where fertile land was used for exports. Taxes were another burden. Africans had to pay them in cash, which meant working in mines or plantations for low wages. In South Africa, the British and Dutch settlers created laws to control black Africans. Movements like the Pass Laws, which required black people to carry identification. Papers at all times, missions and schools spread European culture and religion. While some Africans gained education, the goal was often to erase local traditions. In Nigeria, for instance, British schools taught English history while ignoring the Great Benin Kingdom. Africans were told their ways were inferior, and many were forced to adopt Christian names or abandon their spiritual practices. Resistance was common but dangerous. Leaders like Samurai Toure in West Africa or King Cetshwayo of the Zulu fought back, but European guns and tactics often overwhelmed them. The cost in human lives was huge. In the Congo Free State, King Leopold II's regime was especially brutal. His forces made locals collect rubber, and those who didn't meet quotas faced mutilation or death. Historians estimate 10 million Congolese died from violence, starvation, or disease between 1885 and 1908 in German Southwest Africa, now Namibia. The Herero and Nama people faced genocide. Between 1904 and 1908, German troops killed about 80% of the Herero population, around 65,000 people, through starvation policies and concentration camps. Even without extreme violence, colonial rule caused great harm. In Kenya, the British took rich farmland from the Kikuyu people and gave it to white settlers, leaving many Africans without land. Forced labor built roads and railways, often with little or no pay. Disease spread too. Europeans brought smallpox and other illnesses that devastated communities without immunity. Traditional leaders lost power, replaced by colonial officials or appointed chiefs, who often served European interests over their own peoples. Africans didn't sit quietly while their continent was stolen. From the start, they fought, back with courage and creativity. In West Africa, Queen Nzinga of Ndongo, modern Angola, led armies against Portuguese colonizers in the 1600s, using guerrilla tactics to protect her people. In East Africa, the Maji Maji Rebellion, 1905 to 1907, in Tanzania saw thousands rise against German rule, believing their spiritual rituals could protect them from bullets. Though they were crushed, their bravery inspired others. In southern Africa, the Zulu kingdom under King Shaka and later Cetshwayo battled British forces in the 1800s. At the Battle of Isandlwana in 1879, Zulu warriors defeated a British army, proving Africans could challenge European power. Ethiopia stood out as a beacon of hope. Under Emperor Menelik II, Ethiopian forces defeated Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, keeping their country free. This victory showed the world that Africans could win against colonizers. In Nigeria, the 1929 Women's War brought thousands of Igbo women together to protest British taxes, using songs and marches to speak out. Not all Africans fought with weapons. Some Africans used diplomacy, like writing, petitions, or negotiating with colonial officials. Others preserved their cultures through secret ceremonies or oral storytelling. Women played huge roles, like Ya Asantewa, who led the Ashanti in Ghana against the British in 1900. These acts of defiance kept African identity alive, even under oppression. By the mid-1900s, the tide began to turn. World War II weakened European powers, and Africans saw their chance. Educated Africans, like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, organized movements for independence. They used strikes, protests, and negotiations to push for freedom. Ghana led the way in 1957, becoming the first sub-Saharan nation to gain independence. By the 1960s and 1970s, most African countries followed: Nigeria in 1960, Kenya in 1963, and so on. But South Africa and Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, held out longer due to white minority rule, only gaining majority rule in 1994 and 1980, respectively. Independence wasn't the end of the struggle. Colonial borders left many nations divided by ethnicity, leading to conflicts like the Nigeria-Biafra War. Economies were still tied to Europe, making it hard to build true self-reliance. Leaders like Patrice Lumumba in the Congo pushed for total control of resources, but foreign powers often interfered, sometimes backing coups or assassinations to keep influence. The effects of colonialism linger today. Africa's economies were shaped to serve Europe, and many still rely on exporting raw materials rather than building their own industries. Borders drawn in the Berlin Conference still cause problems. In places like Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo, ethnic groups were split apart. Even schools, though more available now, often focus more on Western ideas than African ones. But Africa is taking back its story. There are growing calls to return stolen treasures like the Benin bronzes. African writers, artists, and scholars are sharing their history with pride, talking about powerful empires like Great Zimbabwe and Songhai. Colonialism tried to erase Africa's story, but it failed. The strength of African people in their culture, art, languages, and courage shows a continent that never gave up its identity. Africa's colonial history is filled with stories of oppression, exploitation, and unimaginable hardship. Yet, in the face of overwhelming power, countless Africans rose up, fought back, and refused to let their spirit be broken. What are your thoughts on the bravery of those who stood against colonial rule? Share your perspective in the comments below. These were individuals who risked everything, freedom, safety, and life itself, to resist an empire's grip. Their courage was not only an act of defiance, but a declaration of humanity in a time when their voices were silenced. Remembering their sacrifices is not just about honoring the past. It is about understanding the fight for justice that continues today. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe. The more we uncover and confront the past, the better we can shape a future built on truth and dignity